So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross himself, he went out to the place called the place of the skull. They stand silently. If you whisper to one another when somebody steps into line. Some of them work together every single day. Others are complete strangers. They're all adults. They represent different races and creeds, different ethnicities. Some of them are doctors and nurses in scrubs. Others are part of the administration. They're in business attire. There are janitors there. Other people from various parts of the hospital's workforce. The door opens as a medical team, some with medical equipment, escort a bed with a patient, her family behind them, who their faces reveal indescribable grief and pain. It is called an honor walk, the journey of a patient whose life is nearly over, from intensive care to the surgical unit where they will remove her organs to save the lives of people that she will never meet. An honor walk. Long hallways all lined with strangers on each side to honor the heroic act of this person's life, the final heroic act, and her family's decision. A doctor described it this way: an honor walk is a powerful act of community. Something solemn, even sacred, happens in these 15 minutes in the hallway. Together we honor a great sacrifice. We give thanks. We hope to help a grieving family in a moment of fathomless loss. Then she writes, as the crowd disperses after the walk is over, they go back to their offices, go back to their labs and to their units. And she says what happens next, they know, is turning one family's devastating loss into new hope for numberless strangers. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross himself, he went out to the place of the skull. Because the city of Jerusalem has greatly changed over the centuries since his time, the distance between the place where Jesus is condemned to die and the place of his execution is uncertain. Some suggest that the distance between those two places might be less than half a mile. It could be the distance in a rather large hospital between the intensive care unit and a surgical suite. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull. People saw Jesus as he was being led to execution. They had seen this kind of thing before. Criminals were often paraded down this road on their way to a punishment it was felt they deserved. There are some who perhaps stood by silently, like witnesses in a hospital honor walk. Maybe they shed a few tears as they saw this man walk by. There might have been more than a few also who shook their heads, maybe even yelled profanity and screamed as they saw this guy who said, "I am the Son of God," being led to his death. His fearful disciples probably were at a distance, watching everything that happened. And, of course, there were a whole bunch of other people going about their daily business, probably not paying even a bit of attention to the spectacle that was on the street near them. And unlike the other Gospels, in John's Gospel, which we hear on Good Friday, no one steps forward to help. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross himself, he went out to the place called the place of the skull. The journey of these past weeks has been challenging for all of us, hasn't it? The coronavirus has marked this journey, making it one that is filled with fear and stress and isolation, dramatic changes in the way we live each day. It's been marked by illness, and it's been marked by death. But this journey has also been marked by faith and by hope and by love. I've seen them. Some days I've seen the faith, the hope, and the love very, very strongly. Other days it's just a small glimmer of faith and hope and love. But they are there and will continue to be there as we make this journey, not certain of where it will lead or how we will experience it in the weeks ahead. Many years ago, the legendary host of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Fred Rogers, gave advice about how families can deal with tragedies of a national scope, of the difficulties that come in trials that cause stress and fear. He said this: "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" To this day, Fred Rogers said, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. The cross of Jesus tells us that love will always triumph over death and darkness. The cross says that faith and hope are not just some nice ideas. They are the guides that help us find our way, especially when the road is unclear. Look for the helpers. We see them all around us today. However, on Good Friday, I look backwards to the story of Christ's Passion, and I see three helpers, three people who stood near Jesus at the end. Three women who would have stood in any hospital hallway as a sign of community in a time of loss. These three women in today's gospel on Good Friday are the helpers that we need, the helpers to numberless strangers, because these helpers enable us to embrace faith and hope and love. So the first helper, Mary, the mother of Jesus. John's gospel does not mention the birth of Jesus, so Mary only appears twice. She appears at the beginning, at the wedding feast at Cana. It's the only place that she actually speaks. The next time that we will meet her is in a silent moment as she watches her son's execution. Yet her words at the wedding feast at Cana with that familiar beverage disaster become the words of faith that we need right now. Do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you. Faith is not about having the right answers, about saying the correct prayers. Faith is not about being nice all the time. Faith is about listening to Jesus. It's about listening to the words that say God's grace is going to strengthen us, is strengthening us, and preventing us from falling, even when we are walking in the valley of the shadow of death. Do whatever he tells you. Mary listened, and she trusted the grace that led her to the cross, and she trusted the grace that led her from the cross. We have been led to the cross this Lent in a way that we could never have imagined. It is a cross of struggle, it is a cross of death. But Mary reminds us that grace is here to strengthen us and to keep all of us from falling. It is in the listening that we come to faith. The second helper, Mary of Magdala. Mary Magdalene was not a prostitute. She was a woman out of whom Jesus cast the 7 devils. Centuries ago, many confused the story of the Magdalene with the penitent woman who washes the feet of Jesus. She, however, Mary Magdalene, was the one who was not only healed by Jesus, but in a radical way, he called her, a woman, to be part of the band of disciples who were following him. Despite the incorrect understanding of her true identity, Mary Magdalene is indeed at this hour a real helper, because she helps us to have hope. No matter what she actually did before she met Jesus, the situation was that she was possessed by something that prevented her from seeing her goodness, from seeing her value, from seeing her true identity as a child of God. Jesus saved her from all of that, and she became possessed by a vibrant hope. Not naive optimism. Her grief at the cross was real. Her hope came from Jesus' message that there is a bigger picture beyond this difficult, dark moment. It was her hope that led Mary Magdalene to be the first to encounter the risen Jesus, not in heaven, but in her daily, still troubled world. What's possessing you these days? Understandably, it might be fear, might be annoyance, impatience. Maybe you're upset. Maybe you're even indifferent on some days to this struggle we're in. On Good Friday, it is Mary Magdalene who helps us at the cross. And she tells us, encourages us, be possessed by hope. That is what helps us to see that the risen Jesus is here right now in our troubled lives. And lastly, Mary, the wife of Clopas. So quick question. Who was Mary, the wife of Clopas? Don't look at your smartphone. Don't run to Wikipedia to look it up. The truth is this. No one's quite sure who she was. There are many legends, and certainly there are some guesses that are based on biblical references, based on history, based on circumstances, but there is not a definitive identity attached to this woman, Mary, the wife of Clopas. And that's why she is one of the helpers that I look for, because I believe Mary of Clopas is all of us. She says nothing. We're not told she does anything, except she stands there with these 2 other women as a friend. For me, Mary, the wife of Clopas, is a sign of love. You know, love is not always about saying something that's nice or good or helpful. It's not always about doing anything. Often love is a quiet presence. In his life, Jesus forgave people, he healed them, he offered his service and his love, and many times it was simply by being present wherever people were. A presence that told them that they were not alone, that God indeed was with them. That is why the Eucharist, the real presence of Jesus, is missed by so many in these difficult days. But the call to discipleship is still present. And yes, we must continue and we must need to feed those who are hungry, to comfort the sick, to stand with the poor, to feed, to clothe, to forgive, to advocate for justice and for peace. Yet the cross reminds us that often the way we can be most helpful, the way of love, is simply to be present to other people. Sometimes it is standing in a hospital hallway as a witness to a family's brave decision to give life to someone from their sorrow. And sometimes our ritual of honor is to stand at the window of our home, to stand at that window and look out and think of the many who at this hour, this very day, are suffering, the people in whom we see the cross of Jesus right now. And sometimes it's a matter of looking out our window, to stand there and to see the presence of the helpers and to be grateful for them. And then it means going back to our own lives, believing at this hour that the cross of Jesus is calling us to stand with 3 women from long ago and become with those 3 women the helpers, the disciples who live together faith and hope and love.